Hey friends, it's Stacy from the FromScratchFarmhouse.com, and today I'm bringing you along as we tackle a very huge problem. So a couple weeks ago, we brought our 2 pigs to the butcher's, and now it's time to pick up the meat. And that's the good news. The bad news is that we have 0 room in any of our freezers. And we have 3 full-size freezers. 3 full-size freezers. So the most immediate issue is, of course, where am I going to find room in these freezers for all of this pork that I need to bring home? But this situation has also brought up another possibly bigger concern, and that is, are we too dependent on freezing for our food storage? Now, we are obviously not off grid yet, but decreasing our energy use is still a goal of ours, and it feels like the more and more that we preserve and grow here on our farm, the more we go backwards in this because we're using up more freezer space. We do canning, we have a cellar, we have other methods in place, but I just feel like we should probably be less dependent on our freezers. The other issue is that relying so much on freezing to preserve our food is actually a pretty big risk. Not only is it concerning if we were to have a long-term power outage, but there have also been times when a child forgot to close the door all the way, or it got unplugged for whatever reason, and we lost some of our meat. Now, I definitely don't have any immediate plans to give up my freezers, but today I'm going to take on 2 projects. Number 1, I'm going to make room in my freezers by taking out all of the random stuff, anything we can use up, and I'm going to explore ways that we can take frozen items and preserve them in another way. Number 2, I'm going to take a hard look at what's in our freezers and make plans to decrease our use of freezing as a preservation method. All right, let's get started by cleaning out the freezers. So one thing I know for sure is that overall organization is going to help make better use of this space. Now, if you saw my previous video on organizing my pantry, fridge, and freezer, you may be wondering what happened here. In a nutshell, there was just too much in here to stay organized, and the containers and bins I was using weren't helping that problem. So here is my plan for this freezer. Number 1, move all random items that can get used up this week to the fridge. Number 2, I'm going to dry the veggies that I know I can use from a dehydrated state, such as peppers and onions. Number 3, I'm going to take all of the meat downstairs to another freezer so I can consolidate and organize it. Number 4, I'm going to transfer things to containers that make better use of this space. I was actually amazed to see all that came out of this upstairs freezer. It was clear to me that much of what was in here didn't have a plan. It was fruit and veggies that we had preserved and hadn't been used up from last year, and impulse buys from long ago. Time to sort through everything and start being more intentional about using this stuff up. Right off the bat, I decided that the biggest change I need to make to use my freezer less is to plan better for the end use of what I'm freezing. For example, last year we froze a ton of peaches, and we have used very few, if any. It would have probably made more sense to can them or use them in pie filling, as that is how we tend to eat them. It will be easier to see what we have when things are sorted and placed together. This will encourage me to actually use it and keep better track of what we have left. Also, removing bulky containers and better organization will mean that more food can fit in a smaller space. All right, let's look at what we have and what I plan to do with it. The orange bags are pumpkin puree. I'm going to defrost a few to use this week. The miscellaneous berries can get used or consolidated. The cranberries were purchased for the purpose of making cranberry sauce, so I can go ahead and make that. The miscellaneous veggies I'm going to try drying. The orange things in the plastic bag are frozen eggs. I won't bother doing this in the future, and they can get fed to the chickens. The green ones are pesto and can get used up. The jars have roasted tomatoes in them. In the future, I will dry more and freeze less. For now, I will make a dish that calls for a bunch of them. With the nuts, I noticed that I have several opened bags of the same kind, and I have bulk amounts in the cellar as well. Right now, I will consolidate what I can. I will plan on purchasing less at a time in the future so that they don't need to be frozen and can just be stored in the cool cellar. The green things in the jar are green onions. I can dehydrate these. The bag of celery is super handy for making broth, but it is also something I could dry in the future. For now, I will use up some to make a large batch of broth with the chickens I'm defrosting. The white and green containers are great for keeping homemade ice cream good. And the bag of chicken breasts is actually really funny to me because we just butchered 50 chickens last summer. This has been around for a long time. The pop bottle was bought for the purpose of freezing dove meat. The idea is that they are tiny, and storing them in layers of frozen ice like this allows you to save up until you have enough to cook. This was my husband's project, so that's about all I know. The frozen bags of zucchini need to get used. Time to make zucchini bread. Frozen chicken broth is honestly something I rarely use. I think I'll stick to canning it or just making it fresh by cooking up a chicken when I want fresh broth. For now, I'll go ahead and use this up. As far as the convenience food, this was clearly an impulse buy that can get used up. The homemade meals are ones I will keep, but they can be organized and consolidated. Anything too old or that I know we won't make use of can go to the chickens. And now here is the very full but organized upstairs freezer. Now I can more easily see what I have, and all of my dairy and produce are in one place. Things are also better organized, which means more storage in a smaller space. Welcome to my basement laundry room. This is where we keep our two other freezers. If you've seen previous videos of mine, you may have seen these in the cellar, which is right off of the laundry room. We decided that that was not working out because they were putting off too much heat and moisture, so now they're in here and it's been working out great. So over here in this stand-up freezer, I have a ton of meat, vegetables, it's mostly venison I think in here, some vegetables, some fish, a massive box of blueberries that I bought from Azure Standard, and some miscellaneous items. Over in this freezer, I have mostly chicken. We butchered 50 chickens this summer, and we did not go through as much chicken as I had anticipated, so there's still a lot in here. And there's also, I see a lot of corn and other veggies, as well as a turkey. So my goal now is to go through this, see what we can take out and use up, figure out if there's something that we could preserve in another way. I'm thinking I'm going to can a bunch of chicken and bring up some produce up to the upstairs freezer. So all of the fruit that's left in here and the veggies, that will go upstairs. All right, let's do this. The first thing I can do here is get this massive box of blueberries out of here. I'll show you what I plan to do with that later. Next week, I'm also going to start defrosting and canning a bunch of this meat. But for now, I'm just going to focus on consolidation and defrosting what we can use up in the coming week. Soon, I plan to make canned chicken, ground beef, and venison. In the near future, I will also be sharing how to can meat here on my channel, so if that's something that interests you, make sure to turn on the notification bell to be alerted when they come out. My husband also likes to make jerky with our venison, so I'll be defrosting some for that as well. All of the fruit and veggies I took out are going to get moved to the upstairs freezer. We clearly froze way too much broccoli, so I might play with throwing some in the dehydrator as well. This freezer is already looking much better from all of the produce we brought upstairs. Now some of this meat can get moved over to freezer number 2, and I think we might just be able to fit our 2 pigs in here. The next step is to go through everything and see if there's anything that I can take that's frozen and preserve it some other way. So I have a ton of broccoli in the freezer, and it's almost time to be growing broccoli again, so I know I'm not going to go through all of this. So my plan here is to try something. I have no idea if it's going to work, but I'm going to try putting the broccoli on these drying trays, drying it all out, and then putting it in my blender and trying to make a broccoli powder out of it. The thought is that maybe I could use it in like a broccoli soup or something. It's kind of an experiment, but we're going to try it, so I'll let you know how it goes. The other thing I'm going to do is take this corn that I know has been in my freezer for probably years, actually. So we're gonna make good use of this though and make what I call chicken soup. I'm just gonna take this frozen corn, put it in a bowl, and add a ton of cayenne pepper. This is just frozen corn and cayenne pepper. So why am I doing this to the poor chickens? First of all, they love it, they don't mind the heat, but it literally will heat them up from the inside. And I have found that it does amazing for picking up their rate of egg laying in the spring, or if there's a lull sometime during the year that is unexpected, you know, it's not during a molt season or something, I will give them this and it will help a ton. I've been told that one of the reasons that this works is because it's a natural dewormer, so if they're dealing with any intestinal bugs, then this can be the cure. I won't pretend to know all the science of it, but it works. With these blueberries, I'm going to bag up a few gallons for the freezer for use in breakfast and baked goods, and then find other uses for the rest. It will be blueberry season here again soon. One struggle for me when it comes to bulk food storage is allowing myself to use it. I know, it sounds crazy, but I can become afraid to use things up in fear of using it all and not being able to grow or buy more. I need to overcome this, and one way that I plan to do that is to better plan out how we will use each stored item throughout the year. I know that if I've planned ahead for, say, enough blueberries to use in overnight oats every week, a monthly dessert, smoothie, or special treat, 12 jars of blueberry jam, one for each month, and 4 quarts of blueberry sauce to last the year, I will be able to more easily look at what I have and know what's an appropriate rate of usage. Today, I just need to get a bunch of these blueberries out of the freezer, so I'm making a crisp for dessert and canning blueberries to be used as a sauce at a later date. The takeaway here is to think ahead when buying, picking, or even growing large amounts of food. Have a plan for its use, or you are just wasting your time and money. At the same time, I'm going to use my favorite easy cranberry sauce recipe with the frozen cranberries. To make this, you simply add frozen or fresh cranberries, a cinnamon stick, sugar, orange juice, strips of orange zest, and ground cloves to an Instant Pot. Set to high for 4 minutes. Then let the pressure release naturally. Add in the vanilla, and then using an immersion blender, blend to the consistency of your liking. Then transfer to jars or containers. I will leave this recipe in the description. Today, in order to make both my blueberry sauce and my cranberry sauce shelf stable, I will be canning them. Both of these are acidic enough to use a water bath canner. These sauces need to be processed for 20 minutes if you are under 1,000 feet in elevation, adding 5 minutes if you are above that, like I am. Okay, we are on day 2 of this project. The freezers are cleaned out, they're more organized, and I actually went and picked up the pork and it all fit. So mission number 1 is accomplished. Now let's go back to the second question of how can I reduce my use of freezers moving forward? I started this mission by writing out everything that I keep in my freezers, so everything that's left in there now, from the meat to the veggies, to the fruit, to the miscellaneous things that I didn't take out when I cleaned them out. And I also scanned through my list of things that I normally keep in the freezer, but we may be out of at this time. Then I went down this list and brainstormed ideas of ways that I could preserve these items without utilizing my freezer. I'll share that list with you now. It would obviously take way too long for me to go through every item on these lists I made, so I'm just going to hit on the main items and ideas I came up with. First of all meat and seafood can be smoked, canned, or turned to jerky. Now, frozen meat is nice to have too, so I'm going to leave plenty in that form, but I can definitely reduce the amount in my freezer using these methods. One thing I discovered with the chicken is that our family does not really enjoy whole chickens and don't cook them very often. When we process our chickens next year, I'm going to separate most of them into parts and then use the carcasses at that point to make a big batch of shelf-stable broth. Corn is something our family really enjoys frozen, but I could also both dry some for use in dry soup mixes and can some. Any veggie that can be kept in the root cellar when not in season doesn't need a place in the freezer. Other veggies that I usually freeze, I will try drying instead, such as peppers and green onions. Fruit can be made into jams, jellies, pie fillings, and sauces in season so that I can keep only the amount we will eat in things like smoothies and overnight oats in the freezer. I also plan to dry way more fruit this year because that was a favorite snack for the kids over the winter. Dairy products and other baking supplies don't take up too much of my freezer space, but I will definitely be more conscientious of what I bother to store. Eggs will be water glassed and not frozen. I have a video on how to do this if you're interested in giving it a try. Pre-made breakfast and convenience foods will be limited, and I will focus on coming up with more shelf-stable options. Okay, there are 2 more things I'd like to mention along these lines of reducing our use of the freezer. The first one is something that I used to be really big on, and that was making pre-made convenience foods to store in the freezer. So this is things like frozen pie crusts, frozen pizzas, and these are super convenient. However, they do take up a good chunk of freezer space. So my idea here is that I'm going to make less things for the freezer and try experimenting with more dry mixes. So maybe, for example, with the pie crust, I could mix up a dry mix of the ingredients in the jar with the recipe on the back, so it's as easy as dumping it in my food processor, adding those last minute ingredients, and hitting go. Still super convenient with no freezer space needed. Another example of this are my make-ahead breakfast ideas that do not require the use of the freezer. So things like DIY instant oats and overnight oatmeal. These are mixes that are put in jars and kept in my pantry. Both of these recipes can be found in my month of breakfast video, which I will link above and below. The other thing I want to mention is that my dried broccoli experiment was a huge fail. So I laid out my broccoli in single layers, I put it in my dehydrator, and when it came out, it was mostly seeds. So I think what happened was that this broccoli got picked really late in the season, or just I wasn't on top of it enough, and the broccoli was pretty overripe. So it had the seed heads on it, which wasn't a big deal when we were eating it fresh. However, when it was dried, it was a big deal. It didn't even look edible. The other thing is that drying the broccoli definitely concentrated the flavor and the smell, and I just didn't think it was something that our family would really enjoy. My broccoli plan going forward is to just preserve less of it and use more of it in season. So broccoli is just going to be one of those things where we enjoy it fresh and maybe just freeze a few bags for things like casseroles. I also am going to experiment with making a broccoli pesto, which many people had told me is really good. And pesto can be frozen in little discs and it doesn't take up much freezer space, so that's something I might try. If you're wondering about canning or pickling it, canning doesn't work very well with broccoli or cauliflower because they can't hold up to the heat and the pressure required in order to make them canned safely. As far as pickling broccoli, everyone told me don't even bother. I really like cauliflower that's pickled, but everyone said it's not the same thing, it doesn't turn out good, don't waste your time. Okay, that's it for today, but this is a topic I plan to revisit in the future, and I know on my own homestead, I'm going to continue working towards this goal of reducing our use of the freezer. So if you have any additional ideas for me, maybe different ways to preserve things, I would love to hear them, so please put them in the comments below. Also, don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss my upcoming videos on homesteading, homeschooling, food from scratch, and creating a handmade home.